Yep, starting with the Patreon donors this time because the show needed to truly be its own entity. So I switched it around for that one time. Otherwise, I wasn't trying to be really slow and eerie and mysterious with some of these transitions. It's just that was the rate that my Videonics MX-1 was going at. So I was kind of stuck with it, but I'll discuss that thing more later. Anyway, I think I have some explaining to do for this one. This is episode number 227 of Oddity Archive, Benny M's TV Party, the Halloween special for 2021. And it all takes place at KLAK, Channel 31, my little TV station. And whether it's true or not, I'll just go ahead and claim that it's America's last low-powered analog TV station. And one of the many, many fine programs on KLAK would be Soldering with Benny, because I can't solder to save my life. And the show is supposedly from 2012, but I used the Asinine Productions logo from 13, so I call it a syndication package sort of thing. Now, this little ad here for KFDG, my little sitcom parody, it took forever to shoot, and I don't really know why. It's just a very simple little bit. You know, it's a single shot and a single joke, but I was having problems with it. Now, that hat that I'm wearing is a Menards hat, the chain of hardware stores here in the Midwest. And I wanted it to be a nod to Sven Gulli, because he would always do those Svenards commercial parodies, Menards, Svenards. And it just didn't show up on camera, and it got exacerbated by the bad signal here, and I'll discuss the broadcasting end of it a little more later. And at the end of that ad where I'm pointing at the promo screen for it, I didn't really care if I got that right or not, because if I got it right, it was cheesy. If I got it wrong, it would be a joke in and of itself. And the transitions between A and B shot on the MX-1 only go in that one direction. It was just, I just happened to get it right. And of course, a cheap little independent TV station, we got to fill the schedule. So, hey, public domain movies. And a little in-joke in there, that picture of Gloria Swanson back there, is from the VHS edition of Queen Kelly, which is the film that she kind of self-referenced years later in Sunset Boulevard. She's playing Norma Desmond, and she's watching one of her old movies, and it just happens to be Queen Kelly, because it exists in a different universe, so to speak, a different realm. And this was going to be Benny versus the bot in some way, shape, or form. So 2 years earlier in 2019, I did one on, transmitter maintenance for KLAK. And it was basically just a big techie joke. In that you're always kind of making your little sacrifices to the AV gods, whether you like it or not, or even know it or not. And so, like, in that episode, it was doing all those weird little tests, and somehow some sort of voodoo would occur over the airwaves and all that. And I found I really liked that idea, and I like doing the kind of KLAK stuff for Halloween here because it's a nice break from regular archive. And because I do feel like I tend to make the same episode over and over again. Again, that's just my own little feeling. There is a certain formula to it. But anyway, for 2020, I was really disappointed in myself because, you had the virus thing going on, and that kind of put a kink in getting my hands on parts and just getting things done. And even though I didn't stop, I'm a one-person operation, it just kind of put a crimp in things to the point where I just had to settle for doing a VHS vault in 2020. And I was just so disappointed in myself. So I was just determined to make a comeback for Halloween for 2021. Become the king of Halloween. And so I wanted to do another Benny and the Bot sort of thing. And it's just, okay, well, how am I going to do it this time? So back in 2012, the first Christmas episode I did I was using public domain footage as a backdrop for kind of a fire sign theater of the mind sort of deal. And I figured I would reprise that, and it spares me from having to come up with visuals for everything. And of course, use public domain footage, so it's not a legal issue, unrestored public domain, archive.org kind of footage. So I wanted something long enough to have it work, for the episode. And so, of course, it's going to be a movie. And it just kind of worked where the line of dialogue, that scroll there, kind of cancels out a lot of the shots of the actor's eyes. Not necessarily this one, but there you go. It worked as a nice effect. Totally unintentional. Anyway, my first thought was, well, I want to run a really bad comedy. And, okay, what's the worst public domain comedy I can think of? Okay, well, Atoll K, the final Laurel and Hardy film, but it seemed a little too obvious because it does tend to show up on those worst comedies lists and that sort of thing. So I figured I would reach out to my old buddy Gino Cuddy, who is really the god of public domain theater and Poverty Row kind of stuff. And I told him what I was kind of planning for Halloween and, what's the worst public domain comedy you can think of? And he came back ultimately with, well, it's not a comedy, but there's this Western called The Phantom Cowboy. And he described it, and I went and watched it, and I was like, yeah, this is a rough one. It's got some unintentionally amusing bits to it, but it's a pretty rough watch, and it's probably the longest 50 minutes in cinematic history. Really, you're seeing kind of the exciting parts just here in this episode. But it was just pure serendipity. Okay, Phantom Cowboy, well, it's Halloween, and okay, well, what would I show on Halloween? Phantom of the Opera, Lon Chaney, that is public domain. And, well, okay, it'll be a joke in and of itself. Well, it's supposed to be Phantom of the Opera, but I got the wrong tape. Well, we're stuck with the Phantom Cowboy now. And it just worked out that I should note that this episode was intended to be in as close to real time as possible. And it pretty much worked. I barely had to fudge the footage. If you were to watch the movie in parallel with this episode, it's actually pretty close. I think it's within like 10 seconds. Anyway, getting on to this bit, these recurring bits with the emergency alert stuff. All the audio was done first. I recorded my parts, and then I did. It took me a long time, years to really kind of perfect the bot voice in Speakonia. But even then, it was cutting up the audio and trying to make it sound more conversational and editing the whole thing so the timing would be correct. And then when I put it here, you can tell I'm kind of fudging the speed because sometimes the words fly by and sometimes they kind of slow down. But basically just turning those warning parts, so to speak, into taffy, visual taffy. And this little blackout bit here, of course, is a little nod to War of the Worlds, the Orson Welles broadcast. Halfway in, everything seems to go dead, and it's just, is anybody out there? So, well, I guess I've held off the inevitable here. How did I wind up doing drag for this episode? And again, pure serendipity with the timing of the footage here. Anyway, yeah, the whole drag thing. So, I hadn't planned on doing anything like that initially. But for whatever bizarre reason, the several months, it seems like, leading up to this episode, it was just working out that it was all these drag jokes and things recurring in footage that I was running, and a thrifting episode I did where I found a laser disc of Lekej, which I only picked up, and I mean the drag show, not Lekej aux Folles, the movie, but the drag show in California. And I only picked it up more for it being a really, really early Image title, Image Laserdiscs, Image Entertainment. But I did try and watch it, and Every episode just seemed to have some sort of drag thing going on. And in one of my more cynical moments, and I've got plenty of those, I figured, well, the only way I'm going to exorcise this little demon is if I do it myself, apparently. And then the light bulb went on. I'm like, well, yeah, that might actually work. And the concept wound up being a parody, a little nod slash parody of Glenn O'Brien's TV Party. And of course, that's where the title Benny M's TV Party comes from. And it's kind of one of my favorite archivisms. It's on the second public access episode. It was a show on Manhattan Cable, obviously in New York. It was in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was kind of the cream of the New York art scene of the time. But at the same time, it was a very awkward show, and at times it's pretty much unwatchable. But you can never tell if it's self-sabotage or they just didn't know what they were doing. But when it was good, it was great, and some really great bands came on. Blondie was kind of a regular on there. And so that's how this all happened. The theme song was a direct parody of the theme song to Glenn O'Brien's TV Party, though I did the whole thing on a Moog MG-1. And the voice, it was just dumb luck again that the bots would be singing voice just lined up. I thought I was going to have to auto-tune it or something so it wouldn't clash too bad, but it just worked. Anyway, this cobweb stuff in the back, I had to leave it up for like a whole week because I didn't know how long it was going to take to work on this episode, what kind of shots I was going to want. So I basically had to not use any of the stuff on the AV rack for a week, and thankfully I didn't need any of it. And otherwise, I guess we'll talk about the MX-1. I'll get back to the drag thing, I guess. But the MX-1, I've always used it as a time-based corrector, and because it has all the consumer in and outputs, it works with more of the consumer video stuff I tend to deal with, and I knew it was meant to be a video mixer, and you could do titles and stuff on, hook other gear up to it, and I did use a Titlemaker, a Videonics Titlemaker as well. And it was me just trying to learn it, and there are mistakes, but I just kind of ran out of time. I worked way ahead before this episode to try and really give myself some time to work on this. I spent almost 4 weeks on it, and there's still some mistakes in it just because I had to get it out the door, but I don't think they're too glaring. The end credits has some typos in it, I noticed. Anyway, the drag thing. So this was actually shot on the same night as the KFDG bit, and there I am. And there's a bit earlier where I'm going, oh my god, and this little thing here, well, at least I have pretty eyes. And that was kind of my real reaction. Some of my own real reactions trying to get the costume together wound up just in the episode because I knew it would work. So I think I'm wearing half of a drugstore, and hooray for internet shopping. I don't think I would have survived going to Walgreens and buying all that stuff. And the wig was like a $15 thing from Amazon. And I have no experience in makeup, but I've spent a lot of time with actors. I've worked on a lot of plays. I've had actor friends. So I was kind of hoping that I learned enough by osmosis and then watching some YouTube tutorials and stuff. And I did have to do a few dry runs first because I did not want to be flying blind in this because the joke wouldn't have worked otherwise. Now, of course, this episode is noteworthy in that you do more or less see my entire face in this. But I figured when I was working on it, well, I'm wearing so much makeup that I'm not really recognizable, I don't think. So I can afford to be a lot more liberal about where I move my head, because I usually have a very limited range of motion. And it worked. I don't think the makeup quite worked. The eyes were indeed pretty. But I'm kind of glad it's in standard definition because I don't think it would have worked in high def as well. I guess I'd have to really refine it That's another thing. I have that musician streak. Still have that old musician thing going, oh, I can do it better. And so anyway, yeah, I was more liberal about the face thing because I wanted to worry about putting in a decent performance. And having said that, I just had so many problems making this. This wound up being quite possibly my longest session ever. As I mentioned, I did the KFDG bit at the same time. I did it first at like 6 p.m. And it was after 2 a.m. by the time I finally finished with it. I kept screwing things up. I found that the audio was mangled on the tape on the camera, and I'd been recording it separately on my field recorder, thankfully. I was burning through tapes because I had to bring out my old camera, and I really did shoot this on tape. And I knocked over a light at one point, and the makeup took forever to put on. And I guess I should note that the dress that I'm wearing is actually the Grim Reaper costume from that you see at the beginning of almost every archive episode. But it's got a big slit down the back, so I just wore it backwards, and I did wind up ripping it slightly on purpose and just trying to fudge cleavage. And I only shaved what I knew would be visible. And the spirit gum remover. That was another joke that got built in from personal experience because the wig would slide off the first time or two I tried to wear it. And so I had to go to the Spirit of Halloween place and get some spirit gum and just tack the thing down. And then when just as a fun little aside here, when I finally finished, I knocked over the bottle of spirit gum remover. Thankfully, there was enough left in the bottle that I could actually take it off, without just having to rip it off or try and use alcohol or something. And otherwise, the nails, I'm glad were at a distance because I did a rotten job. I'd never worn nail polish before, haven't worn it since. And it's I just banged it up so badly, moving lights around and just working with stuff. So yeah, it was just fortunate that it worked. And I did have to put 2 holes in the arms, the sleeves of that costume, just so I could have those kind of Morticia Addams sleeves going there. Anyway, well, let's talk about Craig for a bit. So I named him Craig, and of course this is the whole Glenn O'Brien thing. It's a parody of the talk show, and the joke is that the bot dug up Glenn O'Brien's body and stuck it back together. But I outside of the episode, I named that skeleton Craig, and that was another Spirit of Halloweenism. And Craig was supposed to be a blacklight skeleton, and that didn't really work, but that's irrelevant. I named him Craig after Craig Ferguson because on Craig Ferguson's old talk show, his late night show, he had that skeleton sidekick, so I figured I would name him Craig. And there were some bits with Craig that I couldn't use, like I wanted him kind of lounging, legs crossed in the chair and everything, and I just couldn't make it work spatially. I did wind up posting a picture of it to Facebook at one point, and somebody said that he was a better actor than I was, which is true. Craig was a much better actor, but I'm the better writer. Let's talk about the music briefly here. This episode's already almost over. I spent probably a week on the music, and the main thing was I wanted an album version, so to speak, of Pavand, and not just the 39 seconds that you always hear on archive. So I spaced it out almost like a jazz piece or something where you got a motive and then a spot for improv, and then you come back to the theme and back and forth and back and forth. And it gave me the opportunity to really do my first stab at an orchestral thing. It's, of course, mostly virtual instruments. The only real things on there are an acoustic 12-string guitar, mandolin, and a tambourine, which I wound up recording myself but looping. And just, hopefully I can arrange strings and horns. Hopefully I know enough about arrangement, and it kind of worked. Should there be an archive soundtrack album? I hope there will in the next couple of years. It should be on there, and I think I'll have to put the regular version of Pavand on there too, So whether it starts with the 39-second Pavand or ends with it, and then has, because I like to bookend that album whenever that happens with it, it remains to be seen. And the recurring thing before Pavand, and you hear just underneath this episode, was called Theraminiature, which was initially an attempt at actually playing music on a theremin and not really succeeding. And it wound up being a sound effects collage, and I wound up auto-tuning what was a collage to hopefully the key of C, because I wanted to have something resembling music in there. So I played, I wanted it to stack up against the stylophone bit in there, the only supposed real music in there. And I thought it turned out well, and they kind of play decently together, kind of a pseudo prog thing, and a bit of a half tribute, half parody, half tribute to, half parody of the Alan Parsons Project. But yeah, you really want to hear about that. And we're already done with the episode here. Yeah, hopefully I got the main part of this done. Trial and Error LLC. Boy, that was the understatement of the century. As for continuing this idea, I have kicked around the idea of picking up where does the story go immediately after I leave off, kind of like Halloween 2 picking up where the first Halloween movie, John Carpenter, left off. So that might happen. But don't be surprised if you see me picking up this story in some way, shape, or form in the future. And where's that stinger? Yeah, that's the clear footage. That's the good kind of surreal chroma keyed footage, and a little blooper that I just threw in there just because I liked the way it looked. I just had to get it in there somewhere, even though it does slightly break the mood, but it is a little bit of open levity, I guess. Anyway, the episode is truly over now, so I guess I better shut up. Benny Boy, over and out.